All right, so good afternoon once again, Chanel. How are you? Chanel, good afternoon. Are you there?
Good afternoon to you. Yes, I
All
am
right.
here. Thank you very much.
All right. Have you had access to this Excel which I'm showing on your screen? Chanel, do you have access? Have you seen it?
Whatever is showing, did you send a link or something?
No,
Or it's just what I'm seeing on the screen?
I sent the Excel to your WhatsApp group. Check your WhatsApp group. I've just sent it after the link. Eh?
Okay.
Yeah, the Excel is there.
Okay, let me check it. I'm still struggling to log in with my laptop.
Oh, okay.
Currently, I'm using one. It's not very convenient, but I'm having a challenge with my laptop, so I'll keep trying.
Oh, so we can just continue, right?
Yes, we can continue.
Okay, so we had introduced the course last week. That was the very first class. And most importantly, I did introduce the concept of net present value. And we must have looked at the first simple example on the same. And I want us to advance the discussion a bit. So that I want us to look at this very question, which had been set in December 2022. This was question number 23. Actually, this was the very first exam when we had this first question set, yeah? Now, it's a very simple one. Reading that you are evaluating a 4-year project with an initial investment of 10 million shillings on 1st of January 2023, and the following cash flow characteristics. We have debt and then we have cash flow. We are then told that the discount rate is given as 8%. And then the question had two requirements. Number one, that calculate NPV and what we call XNPV of the project and hence determine whether the project is viable. Number two, can you highlight the cause of the difference between NPV and XNPV? Explain which one you'd use in your analysis and why. Now, part B, number one, calculate the internal rate of return and the X internal rate of return of the project and determine whether the project is again viable. Number two, highlight the cause of the difference between the two. Explain which one you'd use in your analysis, and then why again. Let us down here have the solution for it. Let's down here have the solution for it. The solution. So that let us start with part A. And then part 1, part A, and then part 1. Part A, part 1 require that we calculate two things. One is what we are calling NPV, and then the second one, the XNPV. And then we are told to determine whether the project is what? Viable. So we are to give advice on the project viability. We are to give advice on the project what? Viability, yeah? All right. Could somebody very quickly compute for us the value of NPV? Somebody to compute for us very quickly. How much is the value of NPV? That should be very direct. And so if you calculate it, how much are you getting? What is the value of the net present value? That should be very direct. Now, if you remember from the very first class, we said that there is a formula for this. And what did we say is the formula for this? We had said that for us to calculate this, start with an equal sign. So we say that equal to, you type NPV. So you type NPV, and then you'll have the open bracket. You'll have the open bracket. As soon as you open the bracket down there, Excel tells you what the formula should be. That peak rate, and then value 1, value 2, and so on. The discount rate, we are told to assume 8%. In this last statement, in this question, we have 8%. Now, comma, 8%, and then comma, value 1, value 2, value 3, values are cash flows. Do not forget that. And when we are told of value 1, value 2, value 3, we are looking at the cash flows for period 1. Remember, to the last. Like in this case, period 1's cash flow is this first positive one. The first positive, leave out the negative, because that is the initial investment in period 0. But then we need all of them to the last one. So I will highlight all. I will highlight all that way. I close the bracket. I close the bracket. And then I say that plus, and then I say that plus what? Plus the initial investment. The initial investment is this minus 10 million. That minus 10 million. And that is it. So you then press enter. If you press enter, the value of our NPV that we get is 791, 270 what? 273. So 791, 273. Is there any question on that? Nani yako na swali?
I think I have a question.
Yes, Chanel.
So we just selected NPV 8%, and then we chose that range from C6 to C9. Does that have anything to do with the maybe years? Has it considered this is like this January 30th, 2023, July, like the period in terms of period?
NPV
There's
does
no
not
effect?
consider the periods.
Okay.
NPV does not take into account these dates, okay?
Okay.
Actually, one of the main disadvantage, and thank you for raising this particular question, because this is what I'm proceeding to next. One of the main disadvantage of something like NPV is that it assumes regular cash flows or periods. It assumes regular cash flows or what? Or periods. What NPV assumes is that the period between this cash flow one, this first one, and the second one is the same as the period between the second one and the third one, and is the same as the period between the third one and the fourth one. That is what NPV assumes. And for that reason, Chanel, we have that we do not take into account the debts at all. Is that okay? Chanel?
That is okay. Yes,
Yeah,
that
now
is okay.
for this
Can
reason,
you hear me?
For this reason, Chanel, yeah, you do have that this NPV is therefore not accurate. It is therefore not accurate because of this assumption. We then ask ourselves, how do we then compute the accurate NPV that then takes into account, like you are asking, these dates? And for this reason, we had this thing that is called the XNPV developed, because the XNPV then takes into account even the dates, and for that reason, you'll have that the XNPV is more accurate when you compare it with NPV. How do we compute the XNPV? Again, we'll say that equal to. We say that equal to, these are formulas or functions. So you must start with an equal sign. Equal to XNPV. So equal to XNPV. And then in brackets, how you start is similar. So, and then in bracket, what? As soon as you type the open bracket down there, you are told what the formula should be. That one, you should have the rate. The discount rate, we have 8%. We have 8%. Now, comma, you are then told that look for values. By values, we mean cash flows. By values, we mean what? We mean cash flows. So in this case, we shall pick all the cash flows, including the initial investment, all of them. So in this case, you pick all. So highlight all from minus 10 million to the last. Close the bracket. Not close the bracket, sorry. Next is comma. So the discount rate. And then you highlight all. You highlight all. And then comma, and then comma. The formula says down here that also pick what? The dates. We now take into account dates, so that I'll come and highlight the dates also. I will come and highlight all the dates, the first to the last. Now close the bracket, and then you can press enter. Press enter. So enter that. What we get is this 1 million and something. So we have the 1 million and change. We have the 1 million and what? And change. So 1,062,559 and then 0.8 what? 85. So ladies and gentlemen, what you will appreciate is that the XNPV is actually considered more accurate compared to the normal NPV. The reason for this, you know, we have said that NPV assumes regular cash flows, where we know that our cash flows in this info are not regular based on the dates. Because XNPV takes into account the various dates, then NPV ions out this assumption. So the XNPV is therefore more accurate compared to which one? Now NPV. And so is there any question on that? Is there Any question on how to determine the two measures, NPV and the NPV?
I'm just trying to absorb this because in my AFM, I don't remember doing XNPV at some point. I don't know if I'm forgetting.
I can't hear you.
But I'm saying, can you hear me now? Yeah, I'm just trying to absorb because I have used NPV before. I have computed, but I've not computed XNPV. So this only applies when we are using Excel, or?
Yeah, the X thing is more of an Excel issue, because really manually you cannot, yeah, you can compute manually, but it would be very difficult considering the various dates. You know, that will mean that even one day makes a difference in these dates. So what you have done before in financial management is the calculation of the normal NPV, where this assumption is made. So when you come to this particular X1, this one is more of a calculation that is enabled when you use Excel. Otherwise, manually, this would be very difficult. Sawa Kizongona.
Yes, yes.
All right. Yeah, so apart from computing the two, the question also says that we determine whether the project is what viable, and that is what down here I am calling advice. What is the advice? Is this project viable or not viable? Is that project viable or not?
The NPV is positive. I assume it is viable.
Yeah, so because the NPV is positive, then the project is viable. So we can just comment that the project is viable because the project is viable because NPV, both of them is positive, because NPV is positive. So because NPV is positive, all right, let's proceed on to part B. Let's proceed on to part B. So part B also has not part B, sorry. We have part A number 2. We have part A number 2. What does part A number 2 say? That highlight the cause of the difference between NPV and XNPV. Explain which one you'd use in your analysis and why and why. Now, we have already said that NPV assumes regular cash flows. NPV assumes regular cash flows or periods, which is not the case. Which is not the case. The case with the X1, with XNPV. That is the cause of the difference, ladies and gentlemen. NPV makes the assumption that periods or the cash flows are what? Regular. And we have explained that. That is not the case with the X1, and that's why the XNPV actually takes into account the specific what? Dates. In terms of which one we recommend, in terms of which one we would use, I've said that NPV, because of that assumption, is not very accurate. So this figure is not accurate. The accurate one is, of course, the second one, yeah? So we will just continue here that the recommended is X NPV because it is more accurate, compared to NPV. So because it is more accurate compared to the normal NPV. All right, let's look at part B of the question. And part B also has two requirements. One, we calculate the internal rate of return and the X internal rate of return of the project, and hence determine whether the project is viable. And then number two, highlight the cause of the difference between the internal rate of return and the X internal rate of return. Explain which one you'd use in your analysis and why. So we want to calculate in part one. One is the internal rate of return, and then number two, the X internal rate of return. And then, like before, we need to advise on the project's what? Viability. Yeah, we already looked at how to compute the internal rate of return. Somebody, how much is it? What percent is the internal rate of return?
Would you repeat the question?
I'm saying how much is the internal rate of return? Can you guys compute the first one? We already discussed on how you compute it. You now know the formula. So who has the percentage already? Dennis? Dennis, what percent are you getting, or Abdi? Who is getting what percentage? Or Chanel, you are getting what percent? Oh, Dennis says it's first class. All right, Dennis, there is no problem. I get you, we got you. We got you, so no worries. We understand it's your first class, but Abdi says I haven't understood the calculation. Abdi, this is the easiest to compute, by the way. Yeah, this one is the easiest to compute. Of course, you'll start with an equal sign. You start with an equal sign, and then you type IRR. That's what we want to compute. And then you'll have the open bracket. Now, down there, as soon as you open the bracket down there, Excel tells you what the formula should be. Yeah? You can always compute these things on your own, because actually Excel tells you what the formula should be. Excel says that after the open bracket, can you pick values? By values, we mean cash flows. So I'll come back to the cash flows. And in this case, you pick all the cash flows, all of them, from the negative one to the last, from the initial investment to the last. And ladies and gentlemen, that's it. That's it. You close the bracket. You close the bracket, and then you press enter. So press enter. That comes to about, we get 12, we get about 12 what? Percent. So Dennis, have you seen how simple that is to compute? Dennis, have you seen how simple that is to compute? Yeah, you confirm that, yes. You confirm that, yes. Abdi, have you seen how we compute that? Yeah, Abdi also confirms that he has understood. So it's very simple computing the internal rate of return, actually compared to even NPV. This one is much simpler. This one is much simpler, much simpler computing. All right, let's compute the second one. Now, allow me to again explain that the internal rate of return has the same disadvantage, this one, as NPV. That it also makes the assumption that cash flows are regular or periods are what? Regular. And for this reason, what happens is, again, we had 𝐼RR developed so that based on 𝐼RR, we then compute a more accurate internal what? Now rate of return. If then it has that disadvantage, the IRR, let's now compute the 𝑥IRR that eliminates now that disadvantage. So this also equals, the formula is equal to, you type 𝑥IRR, and then in bracket, and then in bracket what? You'll come here and pick the values again. The values are the cash flows. So you highlight all, and then comma. You highlight all and then comma, and then you highlight the debts. You highlight all, and then comma, and then you highlight the what? The debts. The debts. The debts. Now close the bracket. Close the bracket, and then you can press enter. You can press enter. So enter. That comes to about 0.135 as a percentage. That comes to about 14%. As a percentage, that comes to about 14. As a percentage, that comes to about 14%. 14%. And that is it for how we compute the X internal rate of return and the internal rate of return, the normal one. Chanel is the one who is used to giving us the advice. Chanel, what is the advice on this one? Is the project viable or not viable? Chanel, what is the advice on this one? Is the project viable?
I think the project is viable.
Why?
I don't know if my answer will make sense, but the fact that the internal rate of return is greater than the cost of 8%.
Yeah, Chanel, that is okay. That is the reasoning. You compare the internal rate of return with the discount rate, which is 8%. You compare the internal rate of return with the discount rate, which is 8%. So because the internal rate of return is more, then the project is viable because the internal rate of return is more than cost of capital, which is the discount rate. Cost of capital, which is the discount rate. Yeah, so and if that is the case, we can then proceed on to B number 2. And what does B number 2 say? That highlight the cause of the difference between internal rate of return and the X1. Explain which one you'd use in your analysis and why. Which one will we use in our analysis and why? The answer is more or less what we had in part 2 of part A. So I'll just copy that and then edit it. Copy and then paste it here. Then I'll edit it. So this one should be IRR assumes regular cash flows or periods, which is not the case with XIRR. Again, the recommended is the X1. The recommended is XIRR because it is more accurate compared to the normal IRR. So that's it for that part B, or for that number 2. For that number 2, so it's almost the same answer as what we had in part 2 of part A. It's almost the same answer. Right, now if that is it with that question, then I wish to proceed to discussion number 4. And discussion number 4 is the payback period. Discussion number 4 is the payback period. The payback period, which I'll be commonly abbreviating as PBP. Who can remind us of what the payback period is for a project? What is a payback period? Someone? Could we have somebody reminding us?
I could try.
Yes.
I think this is the period it takes for the investor to recover the investment, so that maybe it can begin to make profit now from there.
So the period that a project takes to do what?
To recover the investment.
Or to recover the initial investment. So that is right. Dennis also says in the chat that at the time it takes to get back the amount invested. That is right, Dennis. We are looking at this in terms of the period that a project takes. Period that so the period that a project takes. The period that a project takes. The period that a project takes to recover. That a project takes to recover the initial investment. Yeah, the initial investment. That period is what we call the payback period. So normally the shorter it is, the better. The shorter it is, the better. The shorter it is, the better. So the shorter the time you take to recover the initial investment, the better, because that will mean that as soon as possible you begin to make profits. So the shorter it is, the better. So remember, you can use the payback period to, for example, compare two or more projects. And in terms of which project you will always recommend you undertake, you take the one with a shorter what? A shorter payback period. Discussion number 5 will be about profitability index. Profitability index, which I'll be commonly abbreviating as PI. Now, again, somebody, what is this? What is the profitability index of a project? Who remembers what the profitability index means?
This would be the present value of cash flows divided by initial investment.
Yeah, so the formula for it, that's very exact. The formula for it is that it is the present value of our future cash flows. You divide by the value of the initial investment. That is right. So that we do define the profitability index as a measure of the profit potential, the profit potential of a project, the profit potential of a project. So it is a measure of the profit potential of a project. We calculate it as like he has defined it for us. You take the present value of future cash flows. You take the present value of future cash flows. You take the present value of future cash flows. You divide this. So you divide this. You divide the present value of the future cash flows by the value of the initial investment. By the value of the initial investment. So you divide it by the value of the initial investment. So you divide it by the value of the initial investment. So just a minute, my Excel has hung. That's why I've not typed anything. Just a minute. All right, so you divide that by the initial investment. So that's how you compute it. What is the present value of the future cash flows? Divide that by what you have invested initially. By what you have invested initially. So that a project is profitable. A project is profitable. A project is profitable. A project is profitable if A project is profitable if PI is more than, one. So a project is profitable if the profitability index is more than one. So if the profitability index is more than what? 1. Now, ladies and gentlemen, for that reason, I will introduce you to the next question, which is in the same Excel which I sent. Can you proceed on to the second sheet? Proceed on to the second sheet. Now, that question, proceed on to the second sheet, which is that question. So let's be looking at that second question, the same sheet. All right, so the question is a simplistic one in terms of the information provided in it. It's very summarized. So this is a question which was set in December 2023. It was question number 22, yeah? The question reads that Safari Limited is evaluating a project with the following details. One, the initial investment of 100 million, residual value of 10 million. And then we are told year one project cash flows, we have 25 million, and then annual cash flow growth rate from year two, 10%. And then the project life is 5 years. The question requires that part A, compute the following project metrics. One is the payback period. Number two is NPV. And then number three, profitability index. The question then says that using a graph, determine the project's internal rate of return. Now, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to explain this, that not all questions will summarize project cash flows the way, for example, we had it summarized here. Some questions will be a bit comprehensive in terms of you will not have the cash flows summarized. So in such a case, you will be expected to first summarize the relevant cash flows of the project before you can proceed to calculate these metrics which we are used to computing. And a very good example is now this question. Excuse me. So the question says the project has a useful life of 5 years. We don't know the summarized cash flows for the project for the 5 years. Meaning that before you can compute what we have in part A and part B, can we first of all summarize the cash flows for the project over the useful life, which is how long? Now 5 years. So I'll say here that I have working. I'll say here that I have working. Now this working is what I'll call the relevant cash flows. The relevant cash flows over the project life. The relevant cash flows over the project what? Project life. And what we will do is I will leave a space for narration. And then normally in presenting a project cash flows, we start from period 0 because it is in period 0 when you normally do the initial investment. Yeah, so period 0 you initially invest, then period 1 followed by 2, followed by 3, followed by 4, and then the last period is period what? 5. So I'll have the periods that way in columns. I'll have the periods that way in columns. I'll have the period in the periods in columns. So that for every period, I will summarize the cash flows which should be considered, Now, in period 0, we have said that the cash flow which apply is always the initial investment. You invest in period 0. So under period 0, you'll have the initial investment. The initial investment, we know that is a cash outflow. And so normally, these appear as a negative what? Cash flow. So under period 0, I'll say that we have minus 100 million. So we have negative 100 million minus 100 million. So minus 100 million that way. And then we are told that the following, the next cash flow is the residual value. Now, when I talk of the residual value as a cash flow, somebody, what cash flow is this? What is a residual value? Anyone? What is a residual value? Yeah, Abdi says that salvage value. The other name for it is salvage value. Elsewhere, you'll find it called the salvage value. But what is it? You know, it is the value at which so this is the value at which the asset is sold, the value at which the asset is sold at the end of a project. At the end of a project, you no longer need the asset, remember, and so you sell it, and so you sell it. So the value at which you sell the asset when the project ends, that's what we call the salvage value. That means that the salvage value apply to the last year in the project life. Like this one will apply to year 5, whereby I'll say that the salvage value we have how much? 10 million. The salvage value we have 10 million. Now, the salvage value is normally a plus because it is a cash inflow. Remember that this is money that you receive. When you sell the asset, you receive that cash. So it's a cash inflow, meaning that it is a plus. It is a plus in terms of what? Presentation. Now, after the salvage value, the question says that we have year 1 project cash flows, year 1 project what? Now cash flows, 25 million. So I will say that one more relevant cash flow are the project cash flows. The project cash flow. For year 1, we know how much this is. Year 1, we are told this is 25 million. So what we receive in year 1 is 25 million. What we receive in year 1 is 25 million. So that's a plus because that's now money you receive from the project from year 1. Now, what about year 2 to 5? Look at what we are told here. That year 1 project cash flow, we have that 25 million. But now this other statement is very important for the rest of the years. Because we are told we have annual cash flow growth rate from year 2, 10%. What this means is that if year 1 is at this 25 million, when I come to year 2, I grow the 25 million for year 1. I grow it. To grow is to increase. I grow it by 10%, meaning I multiply by 110. To increase by 10%, remember, is to multiply by 100 and what? 10%. So in year 2, I will have 27 million, now 500,000. That growth rate is from year 2. Meaning if I come to year 3, I should now take for year 2, again, I grow it or increase it by 10%, but I don't have to be doing that for each year, one by one. Once I've computed this for year 2, can you just drag the formula to the last year? Just drag the formula to the last year. So that way, those are the cash flows for the other years. Abdi, you are saying I repeat the project cash flows computation. So, Abdi, what I've said, the one for year one we know, this 25 million, hiyo tunajua. 25 million ilipeanwa hapa, year one project cash flow. So, nimeweka 25 million in year one. If I want to compute for year two, we are told in this statement that annual cash flow growth rate from year two is 10%. To grow means to increase. To grow means to increase. So if I want to compute the cash flow for year two, I say equal to, I take this one for year one, I increase it by 10%. So I multiply by 110. You increase by 10%, you multiply by 110%. If I'm to come to year three, I should again take for year two and increase it by 10%. But I've said you don't need to keep doing that year by year. Once we have computed this one for year two, I just drag the formula to the last year. Sawa sawa, Abdi. Abdi, is that okay? All right, so with that, of course, we are through, and so we can compute the total for each year. We do not have more cash flows, and so that is it. That is it. Let's get our net relevant. Let's get our net relevant. The net relevant cash flows. The net relevant cash flow per year. So this is what we are looking for to help us compute what the question wants. And in this case, what you do is just to add them downwards. What is the total for each year? So these are the cash flows which we get. Those are the cash flows which we what? Which we get. Now, you cannot answer the question until and unless you have computed these net relevant what? Cash flows. These are now the summarized cash flows for the project per what? Per year. And once we have that, we can now answer what the question wants. Let's start with part A. And part A has three requirements. Requirement number one is that we compute the payback. Is that we compute the payback period. Requirement number one is that we compute the payback period. The payback period. How do we compute the payback period? How do we know how long the project takes to recover the initial what? The initial investment. Now, our cash flows, the ones we have summarized, we have period one, no, we have period 0 actually, followed by period 1, that way, all the way to period 5. I just want to summarize these cash flows again. So we have period 0 all the way to period 5. The cash flows, we have summarized period 0 is that minus 100 million, period 2 is this 25, period 3 is this 27, period 4 is this 30, period 4 is this 33, period 5 is that 46. Those are the cash flows which we have. Now, if you want to compute a payback period, and please pay attention so that we proceed together. If you want to compute a payback period, to this summarized info, I will add a column here, which I will call remainder. I will add a column which I will call remainder. And by remainder, what do I mean? By remainder, what do I mean? Now, the payback period is the period that a project takes to recover what you invested initially. What we invested initially is this 100 million. Remember, for period what? 0. Under the remainder, what I want to compute is how much of this initial investment remains after you have recovered the cash flow for a given year. You see, like the first recovery happens in year 1, you recover 25 million. In year 2, you recover 27 million. So what I want to compute under the remainder is, after that recovery, how much of the initial investment remains. So in period 0, the whole initial investment remains. There is no recovery. Now, when you come to period 1, we now, out of 100 million, we recover 25 million. What is the remainder? Remainder equals this 100 million minus, you say plus, we recover 25 million. So plus that. So out of the initial investment, the remainder at the end of period 1 is 75 million. Now, period 2, the remainder will be this 75 plus, in period 2, we recover this 27.5 million. And this procedure continue all the way to the last year. So that what I can do is to drag the formula for that one all the way to the last year. When do we say that full recovery of the 100 million has happened? Full recovery of the 100 million happens when this remainder column become a plus. As long as you have a minus, you have not recovered the 100 million fully. And that means that the full recovery happens between period 3 and what? 3 and 4. Between period 3 and what? 3 and 4. At the end of period 3, we have the last negative 17.2 million, which you then need to recover in period 4. So you recover the 17 million in period 4 and actually remain with a plus in period 4, plus 16 million. So in period 4 out of 33 million, what you need to recover last for the full recovery is this minus in period what? Period 3. Ladies and gentlemen, let's agree. The payback period PBP, this is how you compute it. This is how you compute it. This is how you do what? You compute it. Let's agree. We need period 1, period 2, period 3. We need period 1, period 2, period 3 to recover most of the 100 million. The 17 million that remain in period 3, you recover it in period 4. And in period 4, when you recover that 17, you still have a plus 16 million. That means you don't need the whole of period 4 to recover the whole of this 17 million that remains in period 3. So the payback period is therefore determined as what? I'll say that equal to. You say that equal to, we need the first 3 years fully. So equal to 3. Equal to 3. So we need the first 3 years. The first 3 years, we need them fully, plus part of year 4. Plus part of year 4. Now, how do we know the part of year 4 that we need? The part of year 4 that we need, you compute this as what? At the end of year 3, you have remained with 17 million. That's what you recover in year 4. When in year 4, the cash flow is 33 million. So the part of year 4 that you need is this 17 that remains in year 3 divided by the cash flow for year 4, which is this 33. So 17 million that remains in year 3 divided by the 33 million that is the cash flow for period what? Now period 4. So this is plus what? Plus, I want the fraction of this 17 of this 33 that we recover in year 4. I must make this 17 a plus first. How do I make it a plus? You say minus this 17, it's a negative, so make it a plus by putting minus before it, divide by this 33 million for year 4. So you divide by the 33 million for year what? Year 4. So you divide by the 33 million, remember, for year 4. So you divide by 33 million, remember for year what? Year 4. What you get is 3.52. Remember, these are years. 3.52. Remember, those are what? Those are years. So the payback period for this project is 3.52 years. Nani yako na swali? Nani yako na swali? Is there any question? No question now. There's something we call a discounted payback period. There's something we call a discounted PBP. There's something we call this because you can also be asked to compute the discounted payback period. Now, one of the disadvantages of this payback period is that you don't consider time value of money. You know, these are future cash flows. And so when you just work with them that way, you have not considered the concept of time value of what? Of money. You haven't considered that. And so this payback period is therefore not very accurate. The discounted payback period is the payback period that first discounts these cash flows to get their present values, so that you then compute the payback period based on those present values that you have determined. So in this case, what we shall do is simple. Again, I will have the period, I will have the cash flow, and then I will have the present values of these cash flows. That's what we do first. So that the period is 0 followed by 1 all the way to period 5. The cash flows are the 100 million. The cash flows are the 100 million. And then of course, the rest of the cash flows also. The rest of the cash flows also. So the rest of the cash flows also. The present, now the first thing to do is to get their present values. The initial investment is normally a present value. This one is not a future value. So that one remain at what you had before. You then need to compute the present value for these cash flows, period 1 to period 5. Ladies and gentlemen, remember we already taught how you get present values of future cash flows. Like now for the first one, I'll say that equal to PV. Equal to PV in bracket rate. What was the discount rate? We are told to assume 12%. So we can work with that 12%, comma, NPI is the period. Period is now this period 1. So I click on that 1, comma, 0, comma, 0, comma, minus this future value. So it is present value in bracket the discount rate. The NPA is the period. So you click the period, comma, 0. Because these are single cash flows, you introduce that 0, comma, minus the future value. So that if I close the bracket, what I get is 22 million and some change for period 1. For period 1. For period 1. So that is the present value for period 1. I don't like that. Dollar thing. Remove it. I already taught you how to remove it. Remove that dollar sign. Those currencies are not in dollars. And so you compute for the rest in the same manner. But once you've computed this first one, the way I've done, you don't need to compute one by one. Just drag the formula to the last year. So if you drag the formula to the last year, those are the present what? The present values. The present values. Now, once you have computed the present values, you can now have that column which we had called the remainder. You can now have that column which we had called the remainder. In period 0, the remainder is just the 100 million. You now work with these present values for the discounted payback period, so that period 1, the remainder is 100 million, remember, plus this 22.3 million. And then I drag the formula to the last year. And then I drag the formula to the last what? To the last year. So I drag the formula to the last year. If that is the case, then you can now compute the new payback period based on those discounted what? Cash flows. And I want somebody to tell me what is the discounted payback period. What is the discounted PBP? Somebody to compute it for us. How many years are they? Just like we computed that first one. What is the discounted payback period? Of course, the full recovery happens between year 4 and 5. There. So this has to be 4 point something. So it's 4 point how many? 4 point what? So what is that payback period? 4 point somebody? Somebody, you are getting 4 point what?
May I request if you could please place the cursor on the PV where we have the 22? Okay. Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah, so who has the payback period? 4 years, 4 point what years? Hello? We need to wind up, so be quick. How many years are these 4 point? That's 4 point what? Who has computed it? Yeah, so this must be equal to 4 plus, that must be equal to 4 plus minus this 13 divided by this cash flow for period 5. So that comes to 4.49 years. Number 2, the second one, number 2, what does the question want in number 2? We want the net present value. So number 2 is NPV. Again, we know how to compute that, NPV of the project. So this equals NPV in bracket, the rate we are told to assume 12%, if I'm not wrong. Yes, 12%. So 12%, comma, value 1, the cash flows for period 1 to 5. This one we know how to do, NPV. Close the bracket plus the initial investment. The initial investment. So that comes to about 13.365, 13.3 million. So that's the NPV. Number 3 and last, the question wants that we compute the profitability index. Profitability index. The profitability index. The profitability index we had said is the present value of the future cash flows. You divide by the initial investment. You divide by the initial investment. Now this equals what? The present values, we have computed these things here. So you take their total. Their total, you divide by the initial investment. So you take their total. So I'll say that equal to the sum of the present values are this, year 1 to 5. So you take their sum. You divide that by what? By the initial investment, which is 100 million. So you take 100 million as a plus. Don't use 100 million as a minus. So I'll do minus first, and then that 100 million. So minus to make it a plus, minus to make it a plus, minus to make it a plus. So minus to make it a plus, minus to make it a plus. So minus to make it a plus. That means that the profitability index comes to 1.13. 1.13. And what this means is simple, that for every 1 shilling invested, for every 1 shilling invested, profit earned, the profit earned is 0.13 shillings. For every 1 shilling you invest, you make a profit of 0.13 shillings. That is what 1.13 means. For every 1 shilling you invest, you make a profit of 0.13. So that, ladies and gentlemen, that is it for part A. We should be proceeding to part B, but I'll not do that today because of time. We will continue from part B in the next class, which is next week. And so allow me to wish you a very good end to this weekend. See you next week. So in case of any query, feel free to talk to me privately, or you can talk to me through your WhatsApp group, just in case you have a question. Otherwise, as always, I'll be sending this Excel to your WhatsApp group very shortly. I'll be sending my worksheet to your WhatsApp group very shortly. So asanteni, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.